Do you see that as more of just an accident sort of thing that happened that prompted the first arrival and rise of civilizations that were patriarchal and hierarchical, that there was just a group of people getting together who had more dysfunction and just started growing and growing in numbers and eventually becoming large enough that they just, whenever they encountered the more old style egalitarian tribes and societies, that they just wiped them out of fear then?
I think that's been a factor, but I think that's generally much more recent. But yes, I think once you're on a roll, once the least functional members of society, I see the emergence of patriarchy and hierarchical systems as a symptom of this neurodegeneration. It's neurological damage expressing itself in the real world. And that's quite a challenging thing to say, but one of the key players in this theory is testosterone, which is primarily but not exclusively a male hormone, and it plays a significant role in this theory. So I would expect males to exhibit more extreme symptoms, and the worst end of that spectrum, you get the most sociopathic, psychopathic control freaks. And by definition, they want to be in charge. They're the people who should never be in charge, but they always are in charge. And once they're in charge and shaping the world in their own image, of course, you then get not only you sort of get a process of the condition accelerating its own demise, where everybody else gets pulled into systems of being that exacerbate the condition. And in addition, and as you point out, almost certainly because of so much fear and need for control, anything that doesn't fit that very limited perspective is seen as a threat and is usually destroyed. And we're surrounded by even our recent history. I was born and grew up in the UK, so I'm labelled as British or English or whatever. Well, you look at what the English did in recorded history. Oh my God. It's shockingly horrifying what we were responsible for in terms of absolutely trashing God knows what we could get our hands on. But it's not unique, of course. It's happened all over the place. And yeah, the lowest common denominator, fear and control, usually wins out. That's accelerated this process where the last relics and traditions that certainly I don't think we're free from this condition. I don't think there's a tribe or a culture that doesn't have a tradition of their ancestors being in much better shape than they were, but nevertheless where they've tried to keep alive traditions that allow access. So the living traditions of plant medicine, or the living traditions where a lot of time was devoted to encouraging access to the right hemisphere as a very essential thing to do. When those cultures meet much more domineering cultures, the result's pretty much always the same. It's carnage, and that stuff gets wiped out. So it's kind of accelerated this process. I don't see it as the cause at all. As I said, I think the emergence of these states of mind, patriarchy, male dominance, and so on, that in itself is a symptom of neurological degeneration. And I can just about get away with that being a male myself. But I think that pretty much is the case. And you look around today, the mess we're in, it's massively male dominated.
Yeah, and that's how we've viewed our whole history, that it's the sexist male thinking that males are the superior dominant, and they apply every theory according to that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a classic symptom of left brain dominance. And again, I've said this already, I'll say it again. I invite anybody listening to this to go online, go onto Google and just start looking up some of the left-right brain literature. And if you do that with an open mind and you look at the traits of the so-called advanced, specialized left hemisphere, never mind the interpretation, by definition that must be suspect. Delusion, denial, it's frightened, it needs to be in control, it's pretty stupid, etc., etc. If that's in charge, And remember, this isn't anybody's fault, but if that's in charge, what kind of world is it going to create? Let me think. Oh, I know. Just look out the window.
Yeah, exactly.
And whatever people think of the theory, I don't think I'm imagining that, because everybody I bump into sees exactly the same thing. Absolute fucking insanity, for real. Not metaphorical, not poetical, clinical insanity.
Yeah.
And what's one of the first things you check out if you're a patient in the consultant's room, you're displaying symptoms of dementia, clinical insanity? Do you even bother looking at the structure and neurochemistry of the brain? Is that one possible cause? Hell yes, it's one possible cause. Is there any evidence in the literature? Hell yes, it's everywhere you look. Is there, and so on and so on. I don't think there's no rocket science to this. I think all I'm trying to do is put this in a language that's stupid enough for my left brain to understand. That was my first task, and it's pretty stupid. And then, can anybody else understand this? It's not going to be lack of evidence. There'll be overwhelming evidence. I won't have any problem at all with evidence. It's how I can get people to ask the right questions. That's all.
Yes, for sure. It doesn't really make much sense that we've developed this huge infatuation into making our diet of, for example, a bunch of different grass seeds, and then
highly processed grass seed, and microwave baked, boiled, baked again, and then we build the most complex neural system we know out of it. Oh yeah, that's a really good idea. I mean, basic engineering. That's I know I say this in other talks, but it is like going to NASA and saying, look, I can save you guys some money. I'm going to build the space shuttle out of plywood, and I've got a couple of engines out of an old Skoda, and it's going to look very similar. It'll be the same,
Yeah.
That's what we've done with the most complex neural system in the world. And anybody, and I don't care what academic tradition they're from, anybody who thinks that isn't going to make a colossal difference is already absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
And I stand by that. I will stand by that come hell or high water. Anybody who thinks that you can build the most complex neural system we know from utter garbage, shit, junk, and it's not going to have a massive impact is insane. End of story. And there's many pieces of the jigsaw that are that solid. It's basic engineering, no possible way at all.
Yeah.
You wouldn't, I use a space shuttle. Like I said, another example. If you were waiting in line to board a 747 and there was a whisper, a rumor that during maintenance somebody had dropped the flight management computer, but it was fine. They shoved it back in and it's all working. Nobody would get on the plane, including the pilots. It would be grounded immediately. So how much evidence do we need? How much doubt do I need to create before we immediately stop, put on the brakes and go, oh my God, there's a 1% chance our neural system's damaged? That should be enough. 1% evidence that we're mentally ill. Of course, if we're already seriously mentally ill, it's probably going to take 80-90%. That's the paradox. There's no lack of evidence here, as far as I'm concerned. It's everywhere you look. You just have to start looking, and then it can be quite scary.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about the macro effects, our propensity for war and defense contracts and building machines designed to kill millions of people, and we killed 100 million of our own kind, all that kind of stuff, which is in the book and I cover. But just bringing it back down to our own individual experience and who and what we think we are and so on. And this is a question I ask quite regularly now at talks and so on. And again, classic symptom, but I ask basically how many people in any given audience, or ask them whether they have an incessant chattering voice in their head. And of course this is not new, this is written about, but I'm talking about numbers here. How many people in your typical audience has an incessant chattering head voice in their head, going on about all sorts of stuff that they would probably not dare share with their partner, their husband, or their wife. Some of it's so weird and bizarre or embarrassing or crazy or whatever. Now, most of us don't want to own up to that. But in a group, and I'm the first one to put my hand up, 99% of people put their hands up.
Yeah.
Now that alone should be enough. Forget all the other stuff. There's so many pieces here where we should be going, holy shit, okay, what's going on here?
Yeah.
The fact that we don't, to me, is more evidence that the condition's incredibly serious.
Yeah.
That's the paradox. It's, to me, it is like, I've been talking a bit about this recently in different interviews and stuff, that I kind of see the ancient traditions, this sort of spiritual oral traditions, and then their sort of distillation into the more rationalized belief versions of those ancient traditions. It reads like a dementia diary. We have these ancient ideas of, the traditions don't talk about, things are a bit better and most people were fine. They talk about something wholly other. And the pun is intended, wholly other. And they talk about divine rapture. Now, these are words, aren't they? What does divine rapture mean? What does it feel like to be in divine rapture all the time? So those are the kind of things they talk about. And then we go through this process and we end up here. Of course, what we need to factor in is we're on the last page of the dementia diary and we can't even understand the early entrance because it's in a language we can't comprehend anymore. What we can comprehend is recorded history, rationalized accounts, and we think that's advanced. But we would if we got dementia. We've got it back to front.
Yeah.
I'm starting to rant now. My own dementia's getting a hold of me. So.
Whole issue that also a left-brainer then brought up, that how come our ancestors, why wouldn't they just seek another tropical forest perhaps? Why would they keep migrating as time passes, more and more hostile and colder environments, instead of trying to deal with the issue at hand, if they were much more functional tens and hundreds of thousands of years ago?
Well, again, it's a good question, but I think it's an incredibly insidious condition. It's screws and cogs coming loose in the very equipment that we use to assess who we are and how do we come up with solutions. However, I think that there was a period, and again, we have these clues where there was a phenomenal effort, and I think some of the approaches that were developed were amazing. They weren't enough to completely stop this thing in its tracks. And I think, once, again, a harsh example, but once you start moving into a form of dementia, your actions and your decisions become less and less coherent. When you've got mild mental health problems, for the most part, you're aware you've got mild mental health problems, and you try to be proactive, you try to manage it, you try to take treatments and so on. However, as that condition progresses, the first thing you do in the classic sense is stop taking the pills. And you start wandering into places that are very dangerous and start doing incredibly crazy things. So, of course, as the condition progresses, yes, we've just ended up exacerbating the situation. We managed to survive. Again, this isn't necessarily about survival. We came out of the forest with a phenomenal piece of kit. And it's allowed us to survive and invent all sorts of technologies to survive. All the while we've been sliding further and further into delusion. So it's no surprise to me we've ended up in the most godforsaken places, eking out a terrible living in harsh environments. That's, again, if you had 100 people in a room and they had dementia and you let them out, what would they do? Would they look after themselves? Would they do the absolute best for themselves? Mm-hmm. Well, they'd probably hurt themselves. They'd hurt each other. Hey ho, what are we doing?
Right.
Right. Classic symptom of mental ill health is what? Self-harm.
Yeah.
Self-harm. As a species, we're hurting ourselves. We've got all these crazy ideas about these artificial boundaries and racism. as a singular species, and even that's an arbitrary term, but let's go with that, all we're really doing is hurting ourselves and destroying the place we live. That's all. And that's what people with serious mental health problems do. They hurt themselves. And that's what we're doing, and that's incredibly sad and incredibly painful.
Yeah. How's it coming along, or have you been able to find potential investors or financiers to get along with the documentary series, perhaps?
Not as yet. I mean, I've had little bits of help along the way, and it's been incredibly important. For years, just trying to stay afloat and get these ideas together was an incredible challenge. And I've certainly tried at different times to almost get ahead of myself, because I could see 20 years ago where this might end up, and so far it's on track. It's just taken a lot longer than I'd hoped. And yeah, there is interest developing, but I think it's really, the real test is going to come if the basic ideas and questions, is our neural system remotely functional, etc., etc. If that can get to a wider audience, that's, I think, when there's a chance for some real action. At the moment, it's still in that early launch phase. The classic analogy of trying to build a spaceship in your garden shed with bits borrowed and begged and stolen and whatever. And I'm not saying I built a spaceship. I think I've got something that's, it might fly, it might not, but it's ready to launch whatever it is. And for sure, if there's any truth in this, I'm going to need a lot of help. In fact, it's not really about what I do; it's about what we all do. If collectively, and of course it's still an if, and of course I expect people to challenge it, and I hope they do. If there's a problem with our neural system, our consciousness system, it's all our responsibilities. We're all responsible for our state of mind. And if we choose to not ask the questions, or we choose to do nothing about it, that's up to us. We can continue on the road we're going on. That is our choice. Or we can choose to do something else. All I'm trying to do is get the questions out there. What we do with the information, what anybody else does with the information, I have no control over that. I just want to try and draw attention to something that I think is very important. And where I get excited is that if it all comes down to a problem between our ears, yes, it's challenging. We don't want to look in the mirror and go, oh, actually, I'm fucking crazy. None of us want to do that. But if that is the truth, and all our ancestors thought that, and our current behavior supports that, etc., etc., to me that's an exciting challenge, because it's human scale. I'd much rather face up to the idea, okay, we've got to figure out how to fix our brain or fix our state of mind, rather than how on earth do we fix global deforestation, global war, global this, that's run away from us now. I think we don't even know what to do about that. It's overwhelming. But the evidence is phenomenally compelling that, the common factor in all the problems we face, obviously, although it's not always obvious till you think about it, is our collective state of mind. There isn't a decision made to build a machine, to do this, to do that, without a human decision. In other words, our state of mind. And our state of mind is incredibly closely correlated. They're effectively the same, but I'll say, of course, they're not. They're effectively the same. The structure and neurochemical regime of our neural system gives us our state of mind. Now, I know they're not the same, and I'm not saying that, but we might as well say they're the same. Okay? So if it's as simple as correcting the structure, and we already know that changing the structure on a minute scale, tiny amounts of neural structural change, tiny amounts of neurochemical change have a massive impact on our state of mind. So if that's got terribly out of kilter, if that's where the problem is, it's a much easier challenge to figure out, well, what is the neurochemical regime? What is the neurological structure that creates a sane sense of mind, a sane state of mind? That's a much easier challenge to me. And we already know an awful lot. We actually know an awful lot. For example, we know an awful lot how we can change our neurological regime, which, remember, we do it every day. Our current state of mind is a product of our current neurological regime. Yeah, pretty
Yes.
simple.
Yeah.
We can choose to defend that, and if that's as good as it ever got, fine, okay. But we know we left the forest. We know we left behind the most complex molecular ecology we know of. That's no longer coursing through our neural system when it's when it's developing and growing and so on and so forth. So moving on from that, and just crude examples, we know a lot about how to feel miles better than we do right now. And often there is legislation and prohibition that tells us that some of these approaches work. We can feel better right now by tweaking the environment. Now, that may not be a whole solution, but why on earth are we defending feeling shit, frightened, scared, stressed, when we could feel not just a little bit better, but phenomenally better? And how would we behave towards each other and the planet we lived on if we felt phenomenally better all the time?
Right.
And that's not exactly light years away. That's not some kind of science fiction future. That already exists. We know a lot about how to eat so much better. In other words, how to construct ourselves and our neural system from much better quality materials. We know that our current neurochemical regime produces our current state of mind. We know how to shift that in a direction of feeling much better, having much more empathy, having much more compassion, not being so frightened, etc. We know. We have a lot of partial answers to that. Why is that not our urgent priority? Yes, because it's a circular problem. It's back to that catch-22.
Yeah.
But if these things can be laid out in an incredibly simple way, I mean, one of the things I'm interested in is if it's possible to lay out a simple diagnosis that the rational mind can understand, and all right, the conclusion is challenging. It's the left rational mind that is actually the most damaged, and we know it's very frightened, the classic ego rational mind. One of the things it really has trouble with is not being seen to be clever. It likes to be very clever. It always likes to be, I'm the best, I'm the cleverest, blah, blah, blah. It's possible, I think, to create a bit of a sort of bit of a Trojan horse, a bit of a trap, where you create a scenario where the really clever thing to do is own up to the fact that there's a problem. Because if you're the one standing up and saying there's no problem here, you're the one that's going to look really fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And that the egotistical mind does not want to be seen to be stupid. Yes, it wants to be in control. It loves being in control. What it likes even more is to be seen to be clever. So I'm hoping that if this stands up to scrutiny, and I'm sure there's lots of refinement and things that need to be looked into, if it stands up to scrutiny, it's possible to roll out a Trojan horse whereby anybody who wants to hang on to the status quo is going to look really fucking stupid.
Yeah.
And the egotistical, the rational mind absolutely hates that. It might grudgingly slink off into the corner grumbling and moaning, but it will not want to be the one standing up going, no, fuck it, we're going to keep everything the same, everything's fine. Well, that's fine when you're surrounded by equally stupid people doing the same thing. But if you've got a building case that actually that's the stupidest thing you could ever say, and more people can see that, it's the emperor's new clothes. Who wants to be stood there with everybody pointing, going, you're the stupidest person in the room? Nuh-uh. So I'm hoping there's a kind of psychological twist to this, where it becomes just too uncomfortable to be the stupid idiot going, yeah, more of the same, and let's legislate and keep our state of mind exactly the same, even though we're about to fly off the cliff and destroy ourselves. No, unfortunately, that's really stupid. It isn't your fault. It's not your fault. It's okay. But it's really stupid,
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it's not possible, but that's kind of my current drive at the minute, is to just get the ideas out there in a simple format and see if ideas can spread, and we end up recognizing the fact that we're all in this. We've all got this.
Yeah.
And yes, some people display the symptoms a bit more, a bit less. Nobody's fault. What are we going to do with this? Do we want the least functional people in charge? Probably not a good idea. do the least functional people want to try and stay in charge when it's going to make them look complete idiots? Possibly not. I mean, a lot of people who are really wanting to be in control, it's because they're very frightened. They actually want an easy way out if they can find one. They're hanging on because they're terrified, hanging on to power and control. Well, if you can provide an easy out that's backed up by rational science, remember the demented language of modern rational science, reductionism is seen as some wonderful tool. It's actually a massive failure in being able to see the whole picture. Never mind, if it's in the appropriate language, who's going to stand up and say, no, I still want to stay in control? You just make it so uncomfortable that it's, there might be some exceptions, but I think there's scope to create a scenario where even the most rabid control freaks would start to feel too uncomfortable being the most rabid control freaks. At the moment, it's almost seen as kind of, that classic Darwinian competition thing, which obviously takes Darwin's work a little bit out of context. Being the most aggressive, being the most competitive is a good thing. But if that can be turned around and the evidence supports it, it's the most stupid thing. It's not such a cool thing anymore, And we kind of all instinctively know this anyway. It's not like we don't already know there's serious problems and it's insane. But if you can back it up with appropriate language, i.e. back to the language of dementia, how do you speak in the language of dementia where it makes sense? And that's the hardest job of all, I think. It's not whether we're insane or not. There can't really be any debate about it. Once you ask the question, either there's a serious problem or there's not. Time will tell. If there's a serious problem, how do you communicate it when actually perceiving there's a problem is the biggest challenge? I hope that's made a little bit of sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, at least.
Yeah, well, that's two of us anyway.
Yeah, it's the real challenge is, really you need to find the exact perfect words and language for each specific individual. You need to change the whole language for each individual oftentimes, so you can get through to them that they can understand that. That's really the tricky point.
I agree, and I certainly don't claim to be the best communicator. That's where I need help. I'm quite pleased that I feel like I've got this to a point where other people can understand it. So I'm hoping amongst those other people are some brilliant communicators who can take what is in essence a very old idea. This is nothing new in this. As I say, I feel all I've done is translate it into. I'm trying to get ahead of the condition itself. Mm-hmm. It's a waste of time talking opaque philosophy and mystical language. We need to get ahead of the condition and meet the condition in language it can see as it's heading towards it, like a big stop sign that it can actually understand. And that language, I think, is modern, rational, reductionist language. But I don't regard myself as particularly gifted in that. So I'm hoping people who have much better communication skills can transform it even further and look at different formulas, animation, film, opera, music. I don't care, anything that can express this in a way we can hear and, of course, hopefully begin to act upon.
Right.
Okay, anyway, thanks for those few questions, and it's been interesting.
For sure. And tell the people where can they get in contact with you and learn more about your work, if you want to leave.
Okay, well, currently the best place to start. If anybody wants to design me a nice website, the content on my websites I'm reasonably happy with, but they don't present too well. But if you go to leftinthedark.org.uk, there's some basic introductory material on there, and then there's a link to another site, Beyond _belief. So Beyond Belief, there's a link on there, plus a YouTube channel. But yeah, go to leftinthedark.org.uk and then look for the links to other sites and YouTube channels and all the rest of it. And there's quite a lot of information on there. So yeah, that would be the first place to start.